and welcome to episode 81 of the Space Policy Show. My name is Jordan Bingham, and I'm your host. Today's episode is International Partnerships in the Space Force. Cooperation among nations is becoming ever more important in space. The U.S. Department of the Air Force sees no exception for military space. Today, our own Dr. Mick Gleason of the Center for Space Policy and Strategy talks to U.S. Space Force Colonel Raj Agrawal about his role as Chief of the International Affairs Division and the importance of engaging with allies and partners. Over to you, Mick.
Thanks, Jordan. It's great to have Colonel Raj Agrawal here with us today. We're excited to hear about the Space Force and international affairs and what's all going on in his office as Chief of Air Force International Affairs, the division there at the Pentagon. And so, Colonel Agrawal, I think it'd be best if we just kicked off with you telling us a little bit about yourself and some of your background so we can get to know you.
Oh, thanks, Mick. I'm so grateful to be invited to, to speak with you and to your audience. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to represent SAF-IA, the International Affairs Office in the Department of the Air Force. And I'm a member of the U.S. Space Force. I've been an airman for 20 years as a space operator. And early last year, I had the opportunity to transfer over to the U.S. Space Force. In fact, one of the first members of the U.S. Space Force, a couple of second lieutenants actually, presided over my transfer. And so two second lieutenants effectively swore me in to the U.S. Space Force. One swore me in and one signed the paperwork. And I really wanted to be brought into the Space Force by those who kind of adopted the Space Force right from the start and didn't have to make a decision about transferring. My time in the U.S. Air Force as a space operator was in non-traditional space units. Most of my time was in air operations centers, integrating space as a function to optimize joint warfighting, particularly air power. And we did some combat space power presentation, but most of it was to use space to make everything else more effective. And I've done various schools, weapons school, Air Command and Staff College, SAS, and Eisenhower School. So I've had a lot of opportunities to get education, to have more utility as a space operator. And now, having been at the Pentagon for a few years, part of it was to help with the Space Force stand-up, and now it's to be part of the Space Division in the Department of the Air Force International Affairs Office to support the U.S. Space Force security cooperation.
Oh, that's a really interesting background, completely different from my experience in Air Force space operations for about 27 years. But that's what's kind of neat about space operations, whether it's U.S. Space Force or the old U.S. Air Force Space Command. There's so many interesting, cool things you can do in that career field. So that sounds very exciting. I do want to follow up a little bit. With your Air Operations Center experience, did you get a chance to work with allies and partners in that context?
Oh, absolutely. I've had a chance to serve in 5 different air and space operations centers. Some of them were called Air and Space, and I think we transitioned over to Air Operations Centers. But yes, I had the opportunity to spend a year in Korea and work closely with our ROC partners there. Had opportunity to spend time at the CENTCOM Air Operations Center, where worked with a whole host of allies and partners. And that in that time was in counterterrorism and global war on terror. Worked with the folks in Germany. And again, really, I don't want to go on a litany of all the places I've worked, but that has been my exposure to recognizing the value of allies and partners working together, fighting together, building relationships. And a lot of those relationships have really become so important now in my current job, where when I travel or just engaging with folks virtually, we recognize each other from years ago, being deployed together, fighting together.
Okay, that's great. I mean, that sounds like you're the perfect person for the job there, and as the Chief of Air Force International Affairs Space Division. So could you tell us a little bit more about the role of your division there, and what you do and what that division does and how it fits within that area of the Pentagon?
Sure. So if you're familiar with SAF-IA, so that's the International Affairs Office, our principal, Ms. Kelly Seabolt, is the Deputy Undersecretary for International Affairs for the Department of the Air Force. And so in her role, she oversees all security cooperation activities, both on the air side and the space side. The idea of space security cooperation is not new. We've been doing that as a Department of the Air Force maybe since 2002. And we even had a space division within SAF-IA between 2008 and 2013. But again, that space division, the idea of space was treated as a function. And it wasn't until recently, over the past few years, that the United States in particular shifted our approach to space and now are treating it as a combat power capability and as part of the deterrence calculus. So it's no longer just a utility such as electricity or anything else that you just rely on, but now it is very much treated in the way I think we should have always maybe been treating it as part of power generation. So the space division within the International Affairs Office is wholly focused on supporting the U.S. Space Force's objectives to build partnerships. And what's more important is to build space power capacity. And within our division, we have two branches primarily that lead into the higher level directorates within international affairs. So I have a policy branch that focuses on space partnerships. We do all of the space agreements for the Department of the Air Force. And we have another branch that focuses on engagements. And that is supporting the Secretary of the Air Force when he does space-related engagements, and in particular, General Raymond as CSO when he meets with his counterparts. And so we travel with him, we sit in the same room with him, and my job in particular is to listen closely to what he has to say and how he engages with his counterparts, and then translate his guidance into space agreements that enable the policy, enable the foundation for being able to partner with another nation. And then I work with the U.S. Space Force headquarters to then task the U.S. Space Force to do what it needs to do to meet General Raymond's intent. So it's a very fast-moving, dynamic, responsive division that focuses on what General Raymond wants to achieve. And that's by Ms. Seabolt's direction to kind of posture us as closely as we can be to General Raymond and his engagements with his, with other nations. I hope that helps a little bit, but happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. There's so many directions I want to follow up on, but kind of circling back to kind of the start, you mentioned how partnerships and engagement and so forth are very important to deterrence. And so I was wondering if you could follow that line of thought a little bit, like why are partnerships important for deterrence? What's the reasoning on that?
So that's a really great question. And I don't know, I'm going to answer this first from my personal experience, and it largely was uninformed, but growing up in the military, and I say growing up, I was a school teacher before I joined the Air Force. But when I joined the Air Force, I was presented with all of these ideas about what it means to partner with another nation. At that time, it was Canada, because I was stationed at Cavalier Air Force Station, then Air Force Station in North Dakota. And we had Canadians serving with us. And as I began to be exposed to more of those opportunities to work with allies and partners in the context of global war on terror, I started thinking about partnerships as a means to legitimize what we were doing. I know that's maybe a jaded or even a negative way of thinking about partnerships, but that's, in my limited understanding, that's all I understood it to be. And as a space operator, we rarely talked about what we did, even with our fellow Americans. And I don't think we ever really understood how to communicate to others what we were doing. So we ended up in a situation where we didn't really know how to talk about what we did, never mind to our allies and partners. The approach that I've now had the benefit of learning about from my SAF-IA teammates is that that allies and partners are not about legitimizing what the United States does, but it's about building relationships and I call it capacity, space power capacity. We're in a situation where we have limited budgets. We have a situation where we maybe can't get after all the things we really want to get after, but we have so many nations that want to get into this business of making their dependence on space more resilient. And the more that we work together to build out our capacity together, the more we can deter anyone that would try to hold our dependence on space at risk. And so I'm trying to find, the best way to characterize this, but I will say that what I have learned is that many of the nations that are now coming to see General Raymond and Ms. Siebold, and even at my level, 06 is meeting with me, is that they recognize that space makes all of their capabilities more effective across all instruments of power, whether that's diplomacy or information or their economy, and certainly their military. Most nations that have any technological capability realize that they become more effective and they become more efficient by integrating space into all of that across the spectrum of their power. And they also recognize that there are nations such as China and Russia that can disrupt that efficiency, and they want to partner with us, and we want to partner with them so that we collectively can show resolve against or to any nation that would try to be disruptive or behave badly in the space domain. I hope that's helpful.
Oh yeah, that's very helpful. If you don't mind, I'm going to make a slight pitch for there's a paper I worked on a few years ago that kind of pulls a lot of what you just said together. It's called Alliance Rationales, U.S.-Canada Space Study. So maybe we can have that spin in on the screen in post-production. I think that'd be fun. It's a Center for Space Policy and Strategy paper I did with Charity Whedon back in 2018, and it helps pull together some of those thoughts. You captured it all. And so I think that was great, the way you summarized all that. Circling back, though, way back again to your discussion on General Raymond and your role in going with him to meet his counterparts. One of the things I've examined before was kind of the issue of like who are General Raymond's counterparts in other countries, because the U.S. Space Force is small for a U.S. military service, but it's massive compared to other countries' space forces, relatively speaking, and they might not have a 4-star general equivalent who's focused on space, or a whole down the whole chain of 3-star, 2-star, 1-star generals, and a lot of 06s. And so I guess does that create a problem sometimes trying to figure out who to talk to, or is that not too much of a disadvantage? Anyway, I just want the matter of scale between the U.S. and other countries, is that an issue at all that you've experienced?
I'll tell you, I am, again, new to this whole idea of security cooperation, and I've learned quite a bit. And I am seeing, first of all, that we're being a bit more innovative with space security cooperation than I've seen in other kind of formats. So General Raymond, and again, I want to be very humble about approaching my opportunity to see how General Raymond works. I am not in any important position other than as an action officer supporting General Raymond, and it's been a unique opportunity to do that. So I want to be cautious about how I characterize it, because again, it's just from my perspective. But my perspective of seeing General Raymond work is that he really approaches his other nations with open arms and with optimism, and doesn't put expectations on other nations to somehow be at a certain rank to be able to talk to him. my sense is, and what I've perceived is that he is willing to talk to anyone that wants to have a conversation with him about space power partnerships. And I think one of the bigger challenges that we have at the policy level is not every nation treats space the same way. And, depending on what nation you engage with, space might live in their Department of Commerce equivalent. It might live in their intelligence department. It might only be civil or commercial. And so the way that each nation approaches space as a function of national power is different. And sometimes that can create complications if it's a matter of one nation wanting to partner with us in the area of defense. So we try to provide General Raymond with as many options as possible, from research and development to helping NASA make connections, or other departments within the United States who do space make connections with their counterparts in those nations to, again, open up opportunities so that that our partners, allies and partners, can take advantage of what we do in the United States and help them become better. So General Raymond will say himself, I think, that we recognize that there aren't any other nations that have a space force like we do, but every nation is looking to use space in some way, take advantage of space in some way, and we likely have some mechanism to do that. Just a matter of thinking a bit outside of the norm.
Well, that sounds that sounds good. That it's being perceived in that way. Sounds like General Raymond has a great way of approaching that issue of the U.S. Space Force being on such a big scale compared to many of our allies and partners, and welcoming their inputs. I guess we're going 2 years now into COVID times. Has that slowed down the engagement at all, or are things still on chugging forward, making more partnerships and making more progress, or has COVID kind of put a damper on a lot of progress?
I was at the Pentagon during, before all the COVID lockdowns, and had been working in another office in the Secretariat, and saw the change. And I've been so impressed with how the Department of Defense really first erred on the side of safety, and really took that seriously, and looked to care for our people, and do everything we could do everything we could to be careful, and to be caring about our folks, and then put all of the infrastructure, IT infrastructure, in place to then be able to do our jobs in a hybrid model. And we've seen that balance, and we've seen SAF-IA, the International Affairs Office, kind of adjust the approach. Maybe couldn't do as much overseas travel, but change engagements to virtual engagements. We have, and again, the International Affairs Office is it's huge. I'm one of many divisions within that International Affairs Office, and we have many that work on the policy side and weapons. We have many that work every single region of the globe, and it's been amazing to see my colleagues across international affairs, just in the Department of the Air Force, adapt to the COVID conditions and remain effective. And General Raymond and Ms. Siebold definitely continue to be optimistic and keep us focused on being effective regardless of the environment. And I've been very proud of the team that I get to work with every day, to see them excited about doing this job, doing this business, and using whatever means to get after that. Now, in the Space Division, we do span all classifications. So we do have some need to go into the building, into the various classified areas, meet with counterparts and other organizations to be able to keep moving forward on an integrated force design, to be able to enable that for the U.S. Space Force and the SWAC, I think the Space Warfighting Analysis Center, led by Mr. Cox, Andrew Cox. And so the challenge now is just making sure that we can keep communications open across our space security cooperation community so that when opportunities present themselves, we can make sure that we communicate with the right folks at the right classification at the right time, with those who are actually doing the work. And we're learning as we go. We just stood up international affairs offices in the 3 field commands in the U.S. Space Force. So now each of the field commands have international affairs as part of their mission and are making available all of the security cooperation tools that we have done on the U.S. Air Force side, now on the U.S. Space Force side. And it's just been thrilling to see happen. So I think if you could see inside the machine, I think you'd be impressed with the speed at which all of this has happened, given all of the restraints and constraints that have been placed upon us due to being as safe as possible for COVID.
Yeah, well, that sounds like some amazing progress. Sounds like you're a busy person. Just to drill a little deeper, like in your division, I guess I find it interesting. I hope we're not getting too much inside baseball here, but like how many people work for you in the division? And you mentioned you had 2 branches, but like tell us a little bit about your team.
So initially, we only had about 3 people. When I joined the team, we just had a couple of folks, a handful of folks that had been cut out of another division, the armaments division within international affairs. And because that's really where our emphasis needed to be. We have such a high demand for partnerships, space partnerships with other nations, that the challenge is now just keeping up with that demand. And so Ms. Siebel really made it a priority to get us the resources we need. She worked with the U.S. Space Force to get billets. I'm actually in a U.S. Space Force billet. So I think you've heard that the headquarters Space Force staff has been capped. I think it's 600. I'm in one of those 600 billets that's been sourced to the Secretariat in the International Affairs Office. We got another 1 or 2 billets to be able to use from the U.S. Space Force. And then the U.S. Air Force, also headquarters Air Force, also provides some billets. We're working through the hiring process now. In fact, I have 3 GS-14 billets open that we're actively hiring into. And we're maybe around 20 folks. That might even be more than I'm losing track of which billets are open and which ones are filled because we are right now moving at such a high pace. There are times that we're working 24 hours a day due to the significant demand, not just by allies and partners, but now by every combatant command. Was that U.S. Space Command was the only combatant command putting demands upon us to meet their needs for joint power projection. But now every combatant command has realized that the defense of space and the ability to project power in, through, and from space is a necessary variable to show resolve in the face of contest. And so every combatant command is working through now. What General Raymond is doing is and the Secretary are doing are standing up space components in the same way that we have air components in every combatant command. And so those combatant commands will effectively make their needs known through their space components, and then would work through headquarters Space Force to then generate those needs and then get them over to my division and across SAF-IA to help resource those needs, provide for the agreements, and to tee up our senior leaders to have engagements with their counterparts to help make those effective. So it's a pretty well-oiled machine on the air side, and what we're doing is just getting all that working on the space side so that we can be responsive to our joint warfighter requirements.
So for this growing enterprise, how long have you been there where you started out with you plus 3? How long ago was that? 2 years ago or something?
I think it was, no, I joined in July of last year. I came over from SAF-SP, if you know that organization. So another office in the Secretariat that was transitioned from sort of an advisory. It was the space organization within the Secretariat until the Space Force stood up, and then Secretary Kendall not too long after I joined International Affairs, he made a decision to move all space security cooperation activities that were happening in the Secretariat into International Affairs. And so it ended up, obviously just coming into my division. The challenge now is across the board is how do we do all the things that need to be done with the resources we have available. And that is just an ongoing challenge that I think, working with the allies and partners actually helps alleviate. And I think about burden sharing, but this idea of burden sharing gives us an opportunity to work with allies and partners to optimize what they're able to do, helps us to focus more on the things from a resource perspective, on the things that we're able to do, and then collectively build a resilient space order of battle, as Secretary Kendall would call it, a resilient space order of battle that is interoperable with our allies and partners, and also makes it so that any disruption of that space order of battle is a disruption to many nations and not just the United States.
Yeah, I think that's part of that deterrence equation, right? Where if you mess with if someone wants to mess with the U.S. space systems, it's not just going to be the U.S. they're messing with, and so they have to factor that into their calculus before they decide. I'm so curious about so many things. I could talk for all day with you. We should go out for lunch sometime or something like that. I guess, yeah, I think once COVID's over.
That's right.
Don't want to get too close, but anyway, what are some of the barriers? I think we touched upon them a little bit, but I wanted to focus on some barriers to international cooperation. I know in the media reports, we hear senior leaders often talking about classification as a big issue. So if you'd like to, or overclassification is sometimes how it's characterized. If you could touch on that a little, and some other barriers that make sometimes you have to clear these hurdles and it takes some effort. If you could touch on those, that'd be great.
Sure. Part of the transformation from a culture that treated space as a function and believing that space was a benign environment, that gave us a lot of luxuries in terms of being able to make things less interoperable, even in terms of classification, because I don't think we ever imagined a situation where we would have to change those conditions. But in the context of where we are from a national security perspective, and certainly from a global conflict perspective, we now must adapt quickly to being able to share what we do with our allies and partners, to be able to reveal the right information at the time we want to as part of deterrence, and to conceal the right information at the right time as part of deterrence. So we're working through that now. I say we, I know senior leaders are putting pressure upon our collective system to get this right. It's not simply a matter of just declassifying, but it's, again, being precise, respecting all of the stakeholders in that process that truly are doing the right thing to protect information so that way we can protect capability. But at the same time, being open in a way that we can invite our allies and partners into the same awareness that we have, and not put our allies and partners in a position where they know less than we do, because that's really not a true partnership. So we're trying to figure that out, and we're working through the challenges, particularly from a space perspective, because, again, we have sometimes intertwined the way we classify intelligence data with the way we classify defense data. And that is something that we're just working through. And, other hurdles include, and I think I mentioned this earlier, the way that nations treat space from a policy perspective is different. And again, the two things we've just talked about, classification and the way other nations deal with space, those are, at a level above the Department of the Air Force, in the OSD and, Office of the Secretary of Defense for policy. Their space office is working through that now. And I'll tell you, it's incredible to be part of a larger team, from Office of the Secretary of Defense to the Department of the Air Force to Space Force headquarters. We have an incredible team in in S5P, led by Colonel Carlos Perez Mendez, and he's getting after service needs. And then we have the field commands all have international affairs offices in the SWAC. So we have this huge team that are all trying to get after this space security cooperations kind of problem set. And we're all motivated and we're all wanting to do this right. And so I'll say maybe a third challenge that we have that it's a good problem is that we have so many people within the Department of the Air Force, the Department of Defense, that want to get after space security cooperation. But because we all want to do this right, we all want to get after it. Now the challenge is internal. How do we make sure that we all can focus on the areas that make sense now that we have a U.S. Space Command, now that we have a U.S. Space Force, now that we have all these new offices stood up focusing on space security cooperation? How do we make sure that all of us within this team optimize our role in that process? And so we're working through that together, and in that process, we want to make sure that we communicate effectively with our allies and partners that, hey, here's who you go to for this, here's who you go to for that. And SAF-IA traditionally has been that entry point for allies and partners. We want to maintain that. And so Ms. Seabolt is working, is really leading us through that in a way that has really been very positive in partnership with Lieutenant General Corey and Mr. Hill at the OSD level to help us through as a team be effective at this together. And so the first two, I think, are challenges that don't live at the Department of the Air Force level. But the third one, I think, is something that we can help, work together to resolve, all for the purpose of helping our allies know, so we don't cause confusion in our effort to be partners with others, because we are. I think any nation that works with us and maybe works with other nations in terms of security cooperation knows that we're a loyal partner, we're a reliable partner, and what we provide in terms of capability, there's nothing hidden in there. It's all what you ask for is what you get, and so if we are at all causing confusion by the way we're organized, we can diminish that legitimacy, and so we're getting through that now.
Yeah, that's that third problem or challenge. I think that is a good challenge, as you mentioned, having too much demand for what you're doing and want to do. That seems like always a good problem, and hopefully you'll be successful in meeting that demand for that. I'm looking forward to seeing how this all plays out over the coming years. Speaking of a little bit shifting focus a little bit more to the future, I know we've had the United States, starting with U.S. STRATCOM, now U.S. Space Command, with space situational awareness, data sharing agreements. There's been a lot of collaboration with allies and partners on, we call it SSA for space situational awareness, or space domain awareness is the new kind of DoD jargon. We need to, I assume the idea is to keep building those relationships and maintain those that you have. But where are some, from a functional kind of perspective, where are some other areas that will be focused on coming in the future? Satellite communications or weather satellites? Where do you see some areas for future growth?
It's a good question. First, U.S. Space Command is the organization that handles our SSA sharing agreements. And the nice thing is the United States doesn't lose anything in the process of an agreement. It doesn't cost us anything to enter into agreements, SSA sharing agreements with other nations. And it's a really great way to begin the conversation with other nations in the area of space security cooperation. So Space Command will continue to do that, and we work with them regularly. We meet with them regularly to synchronize our activities and to work together to achieve mutual objectives. And, again, I bring up this point about maybe avoiding the focus too much on technology when it comes to security cooperation, especially in this area of space. Right now, there's only maybe a handful of nations that have an industrial base that can, that if we were to put something together, a constellation, for example, or any set of capabilities, that those nations would be able to contribute in a way that they could enter that same market. So our, at least at our level, my level, at the 06 level, is we're trying to look at how do we incentivize industrial bases around the world, what nations are able to focus on certain areas of space industry so that they can enter into this market and be competitive and it be profitable for those nations without necessarily undermining other nations' activity. So it's a little bit of a complex ask with, of, hey, where do we see the future going when in terms of coalition force design? But I will tell you, Mr. Cox at the SWAC is really thinking through this. I know that General Raymond has shared his vision with allies and partners when it comes to integrated force design. And I am aware of the future of that, everything from certainly, like you mentioned, everything from opportunities to provide space-based weather, to missile warning, missile tracking, to certainly SATCOM is a huge success story for us. WGS is a success story in terms of many partners going in together with us on satellite communications. So I think the spectrum of opportunity is wide open. It's just a matter of us all working together to optimize. Again, I use that word a lot because with limited resources and particularly in terms of what various nations are capable of, we want to make sure that we don't incentivize a situation where nations can't even enter into that market altogether because they're spread thin. So how do we help our allies and partners focus? And again, that's not coming from senior leadership. That's really a Raj Agrawal perspective, but it's something that I think we're thinking about to help inform our senior leaders' decision making.
Well, I really appreciate your perspective. Like I said, I think I could continue this conversation for hours and hours. I guess any closing thoughts, the messages you'd like to get out there before we go back to Jordan?
Well, again, thank you for this opportunity, Mick. It's very fulfilling to get a chance to share what we're doing, to talk about our team, to talk about the whole SAF-IA team. I learned so much coming into this organization. I did not recognize the role that international affairs plays in expanding warfighting capacity. And for me, it's been educational. And I would, just maybe offer my perspective is still limited. I am growing as a space operator. I'm certainly growing as a guardian, and I'm getting this unique opportunity to see the world from this perspective. And I am looking forward to what the Space Force is thinking through, and certainly SAF-IA is thinking through in terms of building more guardians to be able to have that international perspective and understand the value of partnering with other nations to show resolve together and to present forces together and to create a scenario that it is just too costly for other nations to disrupt. So, but again, just a reminder, everything I've said today is really just my perspective, and I'm grateful to serve as a very small cog in this big machine to get after our current problem set.
Well, Colonel Agrawal, I think that's a great perspective that you brought to us today. So I thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to let us know what you're doing. And with that, I'm going to toss it back to Jordan. So have a good one. And Jordan, back to you.
Thank you, Mick, Colonel Agrawal, and our viewers for joining us. You can find more shows like this in our collection series for national security space at csps.aerospace.org. Our executive producer is Colleen Stover, and our technical director is James Liggins. Check us out on Twitter using #TheSpacePolicyShow. We look forward to having you tune in to our next episode.